And there are a whole range of key housing challenges at play. There's a huge stock of pre-1919 housing requiring refurbishment and retrofitting, including roughly 40,000 back-to-backs. There's also a large stock of multi-storey flats, public and private, a proportion of which following Grenfell may not be safe. We have a chronic shortage of truly affordable housing in areas that are unaffordable to live in, both in terms of house prices and rental levels. We have a large number of households homeless or vulnerable and needing support, and we have far too many dysfunctional neighbourhoods, either too cramped with little green space or located too far from amenities to make them sustainable. In my view, there's a need for a reset in the way that policy and strategy relating to housing and placemaking is thought about and developed. This is the bit that's not necessarily about bright ideas about how to do things, but about trying to put in place a more inclusive and democratic process to develop the sort of vision and strategy that is needed to address those housing issues that are at play across the area. The reset needs to recognise the equal importance of refurbishment and retrofitting and housing support to vulnerable people, as well as the provision of new homes. It needs to promote refurbishment, conversion and retrofitting to make better use of existing homes and to make a major contribution to combating climate change. It needs to reassert the primacy of enabling households to access housing that is of excellent quality, that is sustainable and truly affordable. It needs to base new house building on neighbourhood plans that are built around community-led housing provision developed through effective multi-sector partnerships. It needs to promote placemaking that reasserts the necessity for housing to be closely accessible to amenities and services. It needs to learn from new and innovative housing approaches that are being used in other countries. We might have Brexited, but we can still learn from Europe, particularly, and from Scandinavia. And probably most importantly, this reset needs to incorporate centrally the views of residents and communities. To achieve the sort of reset needed, the West Yorkshire Mayor needs a coherent and radical vision for housing and places that can provide the basis for a robust lobbying for government support and private investment. It's crucial that this vision has the support of communities and providing organisations across the housing system, local authorities, tenants, residents and community groups, house builders, especially those who are willing to innovate and provide affordable options, housing renovators and retrofitters, housing managers and landlords, specialist housing providers. And it needs to involve academics and policy researchers and draw upon ideas from inside and outside of the UK. While there's a new partnership of housing associations in West Yorkshire focused on building new affordable homes, I feel that we need a housing strategy for West Yorkshire that is broader than the provision solely of new affordable housing. A wider partnership-based approach with the backing of the Mayor may serve to identify what the housing provision should be in the area for the next 30 years or so, what barriers there may be to that vision and how these may be overcome, to promote community-led housing approaches that build on current ways of doing things as the key to developing sustainable approaches to meeting needs, requirements and aspirations, and reassert the crucial importance of affordable housing both for rent and for purchase. To identify and develop new and flexible approaches to housing tenure, to move the duopoly of either rent or buy, to consider the balance between new building and the better use of existing homes, to identify the best means to secure the retrofitting and refurbishment of existing housing, to identify ways of making better use of empty homes, to promote the notion of the 15-minute neighbourhood and the importance of housing provision being in close proximity to local services and amenities, and to promote innovative design in the size and type of housing provided to move away from the apparent duopoly between small flats and large executive houses. And I wonder whether this approach could help design the housing manifesto for West Yorkshire and help enable an effective and democratic implementation of the range of actions needed to create a better and far more functional and sustainable housing system for the area, able to meet needs and requirements and aspirations.
Thank you very much, Huw. Yeah, a new radical vision for housing that's collectively devised. Sounds like a fantastic proposal for the Mayor to be leading on, so absolutely agree with that 100%. So move on to Jess next.
Yep, thanks for that. Thanks, Huw. I think I'm hopefully going to echo quite a lot of what you just said. I've got a few slides. I'll just put my screen up, just so you've got something to look at while I'm talking. Does that come up all right? You can see.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So to introduce myself, I'm Jessica Spencer. I'm an architect and core member of the Urbanistas Northwest chapter. So we set up the Urbanistas Northwest as a group of practitioners working in the built environment. And to quote our manifesto, our aspiration is to shape our environment into a more equitable and diverse arena, creating a professional landscape that reflects to and reacts to the successes and challenges that we face. We are not researchers. We challenge the typical white middle-class male heavy dialogue within our profession, share our experiences and shine a light on unrepresented people and ideas, with the aim to enable diverse conversations and allow the new generation of professional women to flourish within our industry. So as I said, I'm an architect living and working in Manchester. So I'm coming to this discussion as an outsider and also as a future resident. And in creating a manifesto for West Yorkshire housing and planning, I would ask, how would you create a feminist region? So our built environment is designed and structured around default assumptions of a typical citizen. This citizen is a man, a breadwinning husband and father, able-bodied, heterosexual, white and cisgendered. The default is this man travels into the city to work each day, whilst his wife undertakes a double shift of paid and unpaid work, with little support strategies in place to help her manage this. We know this is not reflective of the actual population, and we need to unweave the policies, practices and assumptions that accommodate all those who fall outside this assumption. Women, young people, the elderly, children and disabled people, and more. We need to look at policies from an intersectional approach and avoid the trappings of gentrification, creating affluent neighbourhoods that benefit the imagined female and married able-bodied mother equally excludes the majority of the population. I hope we can all recognise and acknowledge our own privilege in this discussion, and it is imperative that you all engage as many diverse groups as possible in these discussions to identify your own blind spots in how you shape the built environment. So cities like Vienna and across Sweden have gender mainstreaming policies, where they are required to question how a decision will enhance or undermine gender equality. And this is how the Swedish town of Karlskoga discovered that their snow clearing procedure was sexist. So transport systems are designed radially from the city centre out to the suburbs, and this disproportionately benefits men, as they typically travel in and out of the city for work. Women, however, adopt a more complicated travel pattern of several smaller journeys across an area. For example, to drop a child off at school on their way to work and then via the grocery store on their way home. The transport system isn't currently designed to support this, meaning it costs women more money and time to make these journeys. When Karlskoga discovered their snow clearing procedure, switched their snow clearing procedure, to clear pedestrian and public transport routes first, rather than the main arterial roads that they'd done previously. They not only made the procedure more gender equal, they ended up saving money in the process within their health service, as there was a reduced number of fractures sustained from the slippy pavements. So these hidden benefits are everywhere. And whilst examples like these might seem like obvious things to think about, they end up slipping through the net when you have a homogenous policymakers who look at situations through one lens. So when planners fail to account for gender, spaces become male by default. Women are twice as likely to be scared in public places than men. How do you design this out in everything from parks to transport? Are there enough single-sex public toilets for starters? A lack of public bathroom limits women's access to space disproportionately more than men. Are there space provisions for young girls and not just sports facilities for young boys? So just to wrap up, I wanted to pose a few questions for you to think about in the discussion. So what informal spaces of resistance already exist within the region that can be supported and championed? Is everyone accounted for in this discussion? How can we challenge the domain between public and private to support and alleviate unpaid work undertaken? We need policies that make care work and social reproduction more collective, less exhausting, and more equitable. How can we create a space where everyone feels safe? And does everyone have a place to go? So just to conclude, thank you. And these are my resources and references for everyone's information. I'll just stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Jess. Yeah, I think that link in terms of the diverse conversations that are needed, it's a huge focus of Same Skies, certainly, in terms of trying to broaden who's involved in conversations. And there are various initiatives that we've been connecting with. I think Claude's on the line in terms of diversity and inclusion with community-led housing, and I think I've seen someone from Project Freedom, just this idea of trying to directly address different needs and challenge the way that the dominant system tends to think. So I'll have a chance to pick up on the questions after the speakers finish. I'll hand over to Quintin now, next.
Thanks very much, Neil, and thanks, Jess. That was really inspiring. I want to talk about what I'm going to say is not terribly new. I want to talk about values and about what we value and how we value it, particularly thinking about housing and planning in West Yorkshire. And I suppose this has been in my mind lately because of the pandemic, because the people who've been keeping me alive, the people I've most valued, have been the people who have been the lowest paid. We value the care work that we clapped for, and we value the food and production and distribution. But our system of values, price, wages, market value, doesn't recognize any of that labor as being fundamentally important. Our measure of value is market price. But the things that attract the lowest market price are often those we need the most. And the things we need and value are often those that we can't actually provide because the system of values that rules, market values, it gets in our way. So let's take social housing, for example. Because rents in social housing are low, it has a low market value. But we desperately need social housing. It's the only genuinely affordable housing. Even that's quite questionable. But there's 4 million households in England at this moment in housing need, and social housing is the only housing that would be accessible to them, but we don't have it. We're building less than 6,000 social rented homes a year. But when it comes down to deciding whether it's worth repairing or improving or investing in social housing, a local authority is bound to question whether they would actually get a better return on their money by demolishing those homes, selling the land to a developer, and getting a higher market value for it. So we desperately need social housing, and yet it's being bulldozed en masse still, because its low market value means that it is not being valued. And let's take the example of land for housing as well. So land, its system of value for land is the highest and best use. That means the highest value that it can possibly legally get. And landowners are under almost a moral duty to improve their land, to develop land so that it reaches its highest value. But if all the landowners all want highest market value for their land, they want to sell that land for the highest price, no one is going to make land available for the things that don't generate money, for our social needs, for things like hospitals, for schools, and for social housing. Because those land uses don't generate money, they don't attract a high market value. And we cannot then find land that we need to develop those services. So there's land in West Yorkshire, brownfield land in the middle of the cities that could be used for social housing, that could be allocated to meet social needs, but it can't be developed for housing because that land has a low market value. So there's not enough value in the land to reward a landowner and to profit a developer. And yet we need land, and that land is there and it's waiting to be developed. But according to our current value system, the only developable land, the only land that can legitimately be allocated for housing is land that will generate the highest value. So market value is just a rubbish indication of what we really care about and what we truly value. Local authorities in West Yorkshire and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority work within a legislative framework, work within a value regime that just enforces this rubbish system. So all land and all assets must be valued at market price and used for market price, generate market price. They cannot be generated at a lower than market price, even when we need that to deliver the values we need. So only a change in legislation can free us from that system. But we shouldn't just wait for that to happen, or even just wait for a movement to generate that change at a higher level, because my concern is about changing values, not changing legislation, because market value has got a hold on people. It's become a religion. It's become the truth, the only thing by which everything else is judged. And it's got a hold in the minds of councillors and in council officers and housing associations who otherwise have a social purpose and are committed to social value, and yet manage their assets according to market value. We need to change our value system. And that starts with the change of values and how we value and what we value. And we need to look at things like social housing and see it in terms of value creation. I'm kind of inspired by the new economists like Mariana Mazzucato, who talk about the distinction between value creation and value extraction. So in terms of thinking about planning and housing, we need to identify land, not by whether it is developable in market terms or whether we could legitimately even allocate it for housing. We need to identify land by whether it's the right land in the right place for the right use. And start from that. We need to build this, this embedded value system, which is then identified in land and housing and the things that actually matter to us in West Yorkshire, and take an inventory of that, because that's the essential step to changing the legislative and policy system that imposes market value on us. So we need to prioritize value creation, not price. We need to value what's put in and not what's taken out. So we need to value the creation of value, the things we need, the things we care about, and not value the things that are just taken away from us. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Quintin. Yeah, that would be a fantastic thing to, I guess, bring to the mayor. If we formulated housing policy, planning policy on that basis of a conversation about values rather than getting straight into, technocratic, bureaucratic approaches, we could see quite a different approach. So bringing that together with what Huw's saying, this kind of new radical vision, and to bring diverse voices into that, and to listen and to be patient and to understand what is valued. Yeah, that's a fantastic call. So I'll hand over now to Hannah and Alex as our final speaker before we look to the chat and invite any contributions.
Thanks very much for inviting us to speak today. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep, it's quite small, but we can see it.
Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm a landscape architect currently working for Urban Wilderness in Leeds. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Liveable City competition, which was run by Leeds Civic Trust in spring 2020, and aimed to identify ways in which the eastern side of Leeds City Centre, which they've named the East Side, can be made more people friendly. So I developed the winning entry in collaboration with artist researcher Alex DeLittle, which consisted of a set of design principles, which you can see on screen now, to underpin a landscape-led master plan and a narrative sound piece which animated the spaces within this reimagined East Side. Here you go. So this strategic master plan on screen is high level and conceptual, proposing to transform the east side of the city into a common ground for both people and for nature. So firstly, by planting 1,000 or more trees, by deculverting the Lady Beck, by removing traffic, and by increasing pedestrian access to the city and key cultural buildings. So a report on the competition entries was then created by civic engineers, which identified a number of common themes. So what's next? So I guess what I was really hoping to do with the master plan, the design of which was quite simple really, was to inspire people to take bold moves and to imagine what we could achieve if we take a step back and look at the area in a holistic way without any site boundaries, and by prioritising people and nature first. It's a broad framework which now needs exploring by the communities which currently exist in the area. So Leeds City region is developing faster than ever at the moment. And I believe that without bold approaches to design and imaginative approaches to community engagement, new developments will just reinforce existing problems, such as the dominance of roads, the detachment of areas from the city centre, and the absence of community ownership of public spaces. So Alex and I have been developing proposals for an alternative site analysis practice or method through a year-long community-led programme of spatial observation and intervention on site, to respond to the desk-based work which we have already undertaken and the Civic Trust has undertaken. We were inspired by the first principle of permaculture, which is to observe and interact, which stresses the importance of observing a site for one whole year before you do anything, to fully understand how elements on site interact with one another throughout the seasons. So now I'll pass over to Alex, who will tell you more about the one-year programme.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hannah. I'm hoping you can all hear me okay. My screen's just gone yellow, which indicates you probably can. So we propose to involve communities, artists, and spatial practitioners and key stakeholders in the city in a year-long process of testing the East Side through observation and through the process of co-producing spatial interventions. We will identify 4 key areas within the site and engage community groups to work with spatial practitioners and artists to create spatial interventions that test the site, respond to key themes outlined in the Liveable Leeds report, and respond to and platform the needs and voices of community groups. These interventions might take the form of installations, architectures, or performances, but crucially, they'll be arrived at through a process of observation and listening, both to each other and to the site. This project is foremost the development of an urban design practice that is collaborative and socially just, that responds to the present crises, the ecological crisis and the social crises, many of which have been touched on in the earlier talks. And this process is grounded in and led by processes of observation. What is produced, the interventions, will be artifacts which showcase and encapsulate the imaginaries and concerns of diverse groups engaged in their co-creation. Beyond its material concerns, we hope that this project will act to break down barriers by sparking conversations around the space and establishing working relationships between demographics that might not normally encounter one another. The spatial interventions that are produced could then be exhibited together and act to engage the public in the potential for the site. It's our intention that this could influence thinking and catalyse positive development initiatives in the area. In what way, we do not know yet. This will emerge as the project progresses. With an emphasis on the process of the practice itself, we hope that in whatever way the project does or doesn't influence future design development, individuals involved will become equipped with and inspired by a new way of engaging with, reimagining and platforming the potential of their environment and of their imaginaries and hopes for the space. In this respect, the practice could be applied in any setting or area across West Yorkshire or indeed further afield, with varieties of communities, organisations, ecologies and stakeholders. We're excited to begin this exploration to better understand what we can achieve by pausing, observing and listening to one another and to our existing environments from the very beginning of the design process and right through to kind of the formalization of designs. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this idea of listening, I think that's a fantastic way of almost kind of tying together what we've just gone through in terms of being able to understand what we value, to involve more diverse people and to be patient with not just imposing solutions, but actually to form it collectively. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic model to think about, and maybe we could devise a housing policy in the region that connects together various local conversations rather than coming from the top down. So yeah, thank you very much for everybody contributing so far. So I guess good just to open it out for the last 20 minutes to, I guess, get people who are attending here to contribute any ideas, comments, links to inspiring examples, or if you had questions for the speakers. So yeah, Andy, I don't know if you've kept an eye on the chat at all as to whether there's any questions coming in, but does anybody want to ask any questions, raise their hand, and we can invite you to ask that, or post it in the chat, as Andy just said.
There are some questions which Tabassum just asked one. I don't know if you want to ask your question, Tabassum, or I could read it out. Tabassum asked, this is for Hannah and Alex. Are there any any online links where you can see the methodology? Have you published anything other than that competition document?
So we're currently progressing that at the moment, so not as of yet, but hopefully at some point soon that will be available. But we can send you the link for the competition entry. But yeah, at the moment, the methodology is currently kind of underway.
I think we're keeping our cards a bit close to our chest, but I suppose what we're proposing really here is working through the space and with communities and ecologies in the way that we're proposing to kind of produce a methodology. We're thinking of these interventions as integral to the process, but not necessarily the outcome. The thing that we're interested in is the nuances of that methodology. And that kind of remains to be worked through. So we're really in the early stages. But what we're proposing to do first is to create an event where we kind of produce a sound piece that compiles different concerns around the space as a way to kind of generate energy around these master plans and the ideas that came out of them. And that will hopefully be happening later this summer. So we'll keep you all posted about that.
Phoebe has a question, I think.
Hi, sorry, I don't use Zoom very much. For Quintin, really, so interesting point, your bit about identifying land and finding the right place for the right use. I guess it's sort of how, if that were implemented, how to stop the volume house builders or I don't know, big developers from taking advantage of it, possibly, I don't know, taking smaller architects or smaller developers and portioning off smaller master plans, maybe. sort of in the same style as Croydon Council do?
Yes, sorry, just unmuting myself there. I think that's a good point. But so the current system is really that land has to be allocated on the basis that it's going to reward the landowner and it's going to reward the developer, and the developers are kind of generally calling for between 15 to 20% of the gross development value. So land has got to have profit built into it, if you like. So it's generally land that can be put to a high-end use, which is why we're seeing, you know, large urban extensions on the edge of towns on greenfield sites, and, you know, sort of executive homes, as Huw mentioned. One of the issues, and, you know, Council for the Protection of Rural England is constantly kind of flagging this up every year in a sort of analysis of brownfield land, is that there's a great deal of land. That's not the issue. The issue is that it's not profitable to develop it. But it's not profitable for anyone to develop it under the current system, you know. So basically everybody would have to identify kind of what market value was in that land and who was going to be recompensed from it. What I'm arguing really is that, you know, the initial, the planning system in England, the 1947 framework, is based around that communities should be located in the most sustainable locations. They should be located where there's, you know, existing transport links, where, you know, where there are jobs, where there are, you know, facilities and services. And we have a tradition in this country, the new towns, the new town development corporations and new towns from 1940s to 1980s, that was, you know, world leading in terms of creating new communities and creating sustainable communities, and some of the, you know, absolute cutting edge design, but also that they didn't wait around for a landowner to say, hey, I want to make some money, my land is available for development. They went out and found the locations. Then they, if necessary, compulsorily purchase that land at existing use value, and they own that land to ownership of the Newtown Development Corporation, so that as that land value increased, as they leased that land out or rented it out, and as you know, the community developed around it, that land became worth more, and all that increased value was reinvested into the community. The Newtown Development Corporations, you know, they had a 60-year kind of, you know, borrowing fund from government, and they paid it all back with interest within 30 years. Owning land and reinvesting the value of that land in the community is just, you know, the most sensible economic means, but it's also means that you identify the locations for settlements, you know, based on the sustainability. So I suppose that's what I was getting at, really, with the kind of new direction to allow.
Right, so more rural, looking for new settlements rather than allocating land within cities for neighbourhoods that could be built. Is that fair to say?
No, I don't want to make a distinction between rural or a size of development. It's the whole process of looking at land based on its location and use rather than its market value. And then you need some sort of intervention, you know, set of tools where you can actually just, you know, divorce the entire market regime and you put that land to use without being concerned about whether it would reward a landowner or reward a developer.
Right. Yeah. No. Very interesting. I think. Yeah. There's. I guess my wider question then is what it ends up being. Who designs it? You know. What it ends up being. But I guess that's, you know, not for now.
Just done a scan through all the other questions. Phil Bixby asked earlier on if anyone knows any examples of a reset to housing like Huw has outlined. I don't know if anyone else in the conversation has any examples. The one that comes to mind from a mayoral perspective is the mayor of Barcelona taking a very radical approach to housing. That's quite a reset. Does anyone else have any responses to Phil?
I'm kind of guessing there are good examples abroad, but very few in the UK. So, yeah, a lot of nodding going on. Okay, thanks, folks.
Can I try and this is Tim Reed from Urban Wilderness here, directing the question at Huw Jones and Quintin Bradley. Do you think that perhaps one of the problems that undermines or prevents real a different approach in the UK is something that is quintessentially UK in orientation, which is that we are a very small country and a densely populated country? We have 4 times the, well, we have the same population in the UK as France does, with France having 4 times the landmass. You know, I think, Quintin, you're onto a winner with the value system. But the trouble is that, as you rightly say, that the system isn't sort of set up to cater for this particular market that we live in and almost perpetuate. If I were a landowner, I would want the best value for my land as well. There's a, you know, in the same way as you want the best for your family, you want the best for yourself, you want the best for, you know. Do you think, therefore, that the solution and the way to come back to Huw, do you think that the way to kind of push this forward is for a compulsory purchase approach to planning, for the local authorities to say, right, we're going to take a sustainable approach, development needs to happen here, here, and here, and we're going to compulsory purchase this land so that social housing, affordable housing can be adequately distributed and in sufficient volume to look after and cater to the people that we need to look after? Is that the solution? Because it's quite a different, you know, because we live in a free market economy, it's quite difficult to see a kind of solution to this.
Can I just come back on a couple of things? The compulsory purchase element notwithstanding, which I think could be a good idea. I'm not quite sure yet. I have to think it through. But before we get there, part of the whole development process has been driven by a preoccupation with ownership. Home ownership is the only true way to live, according to all for as far as I can remember. I'm not quite sure how dishonest we are being collectively in assuming that, because the way things are going, I'm not sure that younger people can be promised home ownership in the future. And whether or not the whole way that housing development is organised and financed, which is basically around selling it on to someone else, either for purchase or for rent, it's not gonna work in the long term. And there's got to be a reset in the way that we think about housing tenure, how people access housing and then pay for it. Because at the moment it's still promising people a foot on a housing ladder, which is gradually being hoisted up further and further, so that people will soon need a very, very large trampoline to get anywhere near the first rung. So if that whole system doesn't work, then the system falls into disuse, into disrepute. I can't see how we can continue in that way while ownership is the basis for everything we do. It's formed a key part of income inequality. Young people can't exist without the bank of mum and dad, or grandma and grandpa. And as a dad and a grandpa, I can say that our bank is positively closed. and that has implications for my kids and grandkids. But it shouldn't be like that. So first of all, before we get to how, we've got to sort of, and it's returning to Quintin's part about values. We've got to question the values we place on housing and the way we live, and whether or not it's feasible and sustainable in the long term to follow a system that is based fairly purely and simply on ownership as the main means of living.
I'll just bring, I guess probably only have time for one more question, but it's a question to Jess from Tabassum about mapping the existing informal networks in West Yorkshire to find out where unused space, vacant space might be in our town centres. That sounds like quite a practical proposal that the mayor could spearhead. And I think that links to what the East Leeds project, east side of Leeds, is trying to do as well. So maybe just, yeah, thoughts on mapping unused spaces?
Is that to me, sorry?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that sounds like a really good idea, because it's the point is that, you know, the provisions aren't there to provide for all these different people. Everyone doesn't fit into this one size fits all box, so people go outside the box and do, you know, set their own informal networks up. And if you don't know what's going on, how can you provide for them? So I think it's finding out, you know, that's the key, the first step, and doing some sort of mapping would be a great way to sort of visualize it and make it apparent. And then also then to help these other groups connect together, and even taking, you know, yourselves and, you know, the mayor out of the equation. Yeah, sounds good.
Do you have anything to add, Hannah, Alex, as to how you're looking at kind of understanding what exists in an area that you've looked at?
Yeah, I guess I could jump in there. Maybe Hannah's got something different to say, but I think initially, obviously COVID's been a barrier to kind of engaging with the site as we perhaps would like to following the competition. But one thing we have been doing is reaching out to kind of institutions and organizations that intersect with the east side of Leeds, and beginning to understand sort of quite the degree of complexity that there is around such a site in terms of development, in terms of stakeholders, in terms of the patchwork of different ownerships of land. And this links back to kind of, I suppose, Quintin's points. And so in a sense, what we've been doing is conducting a desk-based ethnography just through, you know, conversations with these stakeholders, beginning to kind of plot out this picture and really ask ourselves the question, you know, how much do we need to know before we can start actually acting in this site? I think the answer so far is kind of a lot, really. Don't know if you have anything to add, Hannah.
Yeah, no, I kind of echo everything you said. And I think the main thing that we're thinking is, you know, the engagement, if it happens right at the beginning of the design process, that could be really quite valuable. You know, understanding how people use the space now and not presenting them with, you know, a plan or a design which has already been designed to a certain level, kind of understanding how people respond to concepts, you know, and understanding and trying to understand how they could imagine a space without too much information, I guess, to describe how they look at space.
I'm just going to lastly give Paula the opportunity to ask a question before we wrap up.
Hi, thanks for all the presentations. They've been very, very interesting. So just before I ask my question, I'm an architect. I work in London, and I work for a practice who is trying hard to put social housing back into what has been the you know, the golden age of the production of affordable homes. And the majority of our projects are mainly existing affordable, you know, housing estates, which have been into disrepair, into mismanagement, causing all sorts of costs. So we are very aware of how much can cost to do the wrong thing. It's not just about being good or having great values, it actually generates a lot of cost and a lot of damage not to do social housing, not to deliver affordable housing, not to give the chance to people to live in decent homes. Now, my question is, do you think that part of the problem, and this is also connecting to the to what Jess was saying about mapping, about measuring, is the problem that we can't measure this damage, and is the problem that we can't connect this damage to the people that will eventually have to pay for it? Because if the NHS needs to provide more, more assistance to people who are actually ill because they live in unsafe, unhealthy homes, this is not money that is any more clean or dirty of the money that you need to refurbish the homes or to build new homes that are better and more healthy. So it's the problem that pots of money and responsibility are completely disconnected in this political system.
Do we understand the problem that we have? I come back to the values question. We're not valuing the impact of having a dysfunctional housing and values for housing in society. Does anybody have any response to Paolo's comment? Speakers or otherwise, people who have attended to listen in.
Can I just chip in?
Absolutely.
We're working with some clients. I think everybody's made some really, really good points, and what Paolo was saying just then, I agree with entirely. We're working with a few clients who are looking at different valuation models. So trying to get away from just looking at financial capitals to looking at natural capital and social capital, intellectual capital, and so on. So I don't know whether Quintin has come across these types of valuation models previously, or anybody else has in the room, and just whether anybody has any thoughts about them. Yorkshire Water and their property arm are promoting the 6 capitals valuation. Arup have a total valuation model which tries to capture some of the kind of social cost or the opportunity cost of not doing things a certain way.
Daniel, I don't have experience of that. What I have experience of is often affordable areas that are classified or being set apart for social housing being outmaneuvered and outplayed, outgunned effectively by the housing developers who come in and offer a bigger price. And I'd be interested to see how that can transform the actual value system, because that's the crux of this, isn't it? It's about how to get Quintin's value-based, social value-based system and thinking into the financial valuation process, and it's tricky. In the UK, we have this quite a nuanced set of circumstances which values land much more highly than in other, than in Germany or France or wherever. And interestingly, something like 80% of French housing is rented, isn't it? It's a very different system, and I don't know if it's unique to us, but it's quite difficult to change the process here.
It's interesting actually, because I used to work for one of the big volume house builders, and there was a point a couple of years ago where the RPs were actually outbidding us for land because of the Homes England subsidy, which is quite interesting. And perhaps that we thought at the time, perhaps a little bit of naivety, not valuing the land at the appropriate rate or not taking abnormal costs into account. But yeah, it's very interesting. And Quintin, just I know you said the volume house builders typically take about 20%. in my experience, it's actually higher. So it's about 30, 32. Doesn't make it better. Just.
I'm just going to jump in there, noting some of the time. We have just gone past 7 o'clock. Keen not to exhaust anybody. There are future events in this Decent Homes and Livable Places series, and also wider conversation as part of the Alternative Manifesto process for Same Skies. So do keep an eye on those events and get involved in the discussion. It's an important time to engage with the West Yorkshire mayoral election. So we'll be pulling together the recording, and we'll put up a summary of today's event. We're also going to follow up with an email to everybody asking you what stuck with you from the discussion and the event. It's an opportunity to ask more questions, and we can coordinate that with the speakers and have a bit more of a dialogue. There is, as I say, another event on the 25th of March to kind of continue this conversation. So any other questions, feel free to bring them into that conversation there. And yeah, any suggestions of ideas, proposals, links to things that are happening in West Yorkshire, please do send them across. The whole point of this process of the Alternative Manifesto is to connect voices and listen to what is happening and try and then bring that to the prospective mayor. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining this evening. Thanks to all the speakers and all the contributions. That was fantastic. And yeah, look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Thanks to the chair.
Thank you all. Have a nice evening. You staying on, Andy?
Yeah, just for a second.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yep. And really got going as well by the end. I
yeah.
could have done another 15 or 20 minutes without exhausting people.
Yeah. I was like, this could go on, but yeah. I like your principle of come in.
It kind of leaves people wanting more as well, which is a good thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think a lot of ideas. It's always overwhelming doing those things, isn't it? You come out, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Because I've listened to these back a few times now, I've found that I very often, actually, when I'm listening back, don't say anything coherent in response to what the person said. I just congratulate them for it being a good contribution, and that just keeps things rolling. I think that might be some of the knack, is just to say something which keeps things going on.
Exactly. But your brain's kind of in a different space. You're not really engaging in the content. You're like making sure it's happening.
Yeah, it's really, really tough, I think. And yeah, you did it well though. You did whatever it is that keeps it going. You did it.
Yeah, it felt like obviously it's weird not seeing people, but it felt like people were engaged.
Yeah,
from what I could tell. So that's good.
Yeah. It is slightly strange when people ask a question when you can't see their face as well. But
yeah.
If you're a radio or DJ or something like that, then I suppose you get that, don't you? I mean, it's just picture.
Get used to it.
Well, I think that radio presenters are supposed to always have pictures of people, aren't they, in front of them, so that they can, this is so and so who lives at regular radio.
Okay, yeah.
What they perceive as their typical listeners. That stuff about value, though, that's intense and quite technical, but clearly is really important. But it suddenly opens up massive questions about, is the only answer national legislation?
I think yes, but I kind of alluded to it in my response in the chat. Like, the mayor will be doing things like buying large swathes of land.
Yeah.
And in the same way that Andy Boyle and such are saying that any development needs to commit to, being zero carbon, or to have a measurement of the carbon impact, the same call can be made of any action the mayor takes. that it has to promote the benefit of the wider, human need.
Yeah.
And any forensic examination of what's going to happen if that's not challenged will just fall on flat ears, because it will just be big money goes into land,
Yeah.
big developers come in to develop it, and we just get more of what we've seen.
Yeah.
So I think the mayor has a lot it could try and embed if they wanted to. But
are you sort of bookmarking that thought for this piece on planning? Is that the sort of thing that will cover?
Well, my whole PhD is asking this question of values as well. So yeah, inevitably I'll be reflecting on it in the piece. What the piece is, I'm not entirely sure yet, because I do want to kind of try and bring the voices that have contributed to these discussions into it. So
great thing to do.
Yeah, so it might end up having like 10 contributors as authors of it, whilst I edit it together.
Yeah.
I'm going for a less meeting-based approach, and just more like having conversations and asking them, would you provide me a line or two on that?
More people.
So yeah, that is bookmarked. And I guess, what do we have to do to get the chat? Do I have to export it?
No, I think when I press stop.
Okay, you'll get it.
Yeah, which I will press stop recording now, because I got a terrifying message halfway through from my computer saying your computer's run out of space.